Just so you know, or it's 7, so I'm gonna say hello to social media, Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for joining us tonight. We have a great program lined up for you this evening. We're gonna start the music here and let everybody into the room. Here we go. Evening. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Veterans Breakfast Club, Greatest Generation Live for Thursday, July 11th. Thank you all for joining us 2 nights in a row. We were on last night with a special live stream program from the Nautilus in the Pacific Ocean. Glenn was our host last night, and Glenn is our host again tonight. Glenn, you're doing double duty.
It's great. I get time and a half for this, so
What?
uh,
Wait a second.
you
Didn't we
know,
talk a
right?
little bit last week about double checking our contracts here?
That program last night, I have to tell you, was one of my favorites that I've done over all these years. Not that I did anything, but Bob Ballard, the famous Bob Ballard, we got another 20 minutes with him through his nephew, Jeff Ballard, who's become such a great friend to the program. And to be broadcasting live from Iron Bottom Sound, just off of Savile Island, and seeing all that live on a Zoom cast here in Pittsburgh, it just floored me. You know, I don't know that I'll ever get to Iron Bottom Sound, but that was as close as you can be without being there.
Mhm. You
So
recorded that
Absolutely
one,
something that
didn't you?
maybe we say that again, Dave.
You recorded that, didn't you?
Absolutely, you can find that, and that's thanks. That's a great segue. You can find that on our YouTube channel, Veterans Breakfast Club. Check us out on YouTube. All of our past programs are on there. You can check out www.veteransbreakfastclub.org. You can also see all of our past live streams there and check out who we are. Because those of you who may be new to us tonight, our mission is creating communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. And we've been doing this for 17, 18 years. Long time, a lot of veteran stories, and we've missed, we need more. So if you know any veterans and you'd like to have them join us, please reach out to your network and check us out on the website. Check out all of our past programs, our upcoming online programs, upcoming in-person breakfasts that we do as well in and around the Pittsburgh region. And you can check out our current magazine, which I'll get into a little bit more later. But without further ado, I'll hand it off to Glenn here for our program this evening.
yeah, thank you, Sean. Thanks very much. This is what I love about this position I have as the host of Greatest Generation Live, and that's last night we were in Iron Bottom Sound talking about the Battle of Savile Island and all the other naval battles that occurred, and actually seeing the American and Japanese and other shipwrecks at the bottom of the Sound. And now today we bounce across the world to the Mediterranean theater for the most part, and just the fascinating story of the U.S. Army Rangers in World War II. And it includes the discussion of I think, the most famous Ranger, my opinion, uh, William O. Darby, who was one of my favorite characters, let's say, of World War II. I first time ever heard of him, I read this book, Darby's Rangers, We Led the Way, and our guests will explain, this book, it written by Darby, but then not published for 20 years, um, written then with a William Baumer who helped, who I guess edited and put it out. And of course, there's the movie, which we haven't talked a lot about.
James Garner.
James Garner. I mean, you can't get any more American than James Garner. Geez, OP.
I have a great story on James Garner, by the way. So,
Darby's Rangers, The Great Escape. I mean, the man is ubiquitous. Anyway, we have two fantastic guests tonight to help us with this story, to tell this story. First is Mir Bahmanyar. Mir, please say hello to the audience.
hey, how you guys doing? I'm happy you're all here, and thanks for having me, Glenn, by the way.
It's a pleasure, Mir. I've enjoyed talking to you as we've set up this program. Mir, give us a little background on yourself because you were an Army Ranger yourself.
Yeah, you told me we don't have 6 hours,
Yeah,
so
well, okay, give us the 30-second version.
30-second version. I got a 4-year degree out of Berkeley in history. I enlisted. I tried to go to special forces back in the day in the mid 80s. And the recruiters told me to get lost because you needed to be prior service. So they said, but we have Ranger battalions. And I had, of course, grown up reading all the LRP Ranger books, World War II books, all that. So I enlisted into the 2nd Ranger Battalion. I did basic AIT airborne school and 2 Ranger indoctrination programs at Benning. And then I ended up at Bravo Company 275. Back then was Fort Lewis. And I was a machine gunner, and they made me a training NCO. And I went from enlisted to a green to gold conversion without attending Ranger school. Went to ROTC in the Bay Area, got injured playing soccer, and that was the end of my military career. So that's my short thing.
No Purple Heart for that one, right?
Well, I applied, but I didn't get it. No, I got nothing. Just the usual, thanks for coming to the military, that kind of thing. So.
And what led you into being a historian and a writer?
It was this is a long story, and I'm definitely going to have to keep this short. I went
15
to
seconds.
Hollywood, went to Hollywood to become a movie producer, and I ended up with a good friend of mine who was an actor who was also from the 2nd Ranger Battalion long before I was there, and he was friends with Harry Humphreys, who was a tech advisor on Black Hawk Down. So I came on board to do a lot of preliminary research and all that. And eventually I wasn't taken to Morocco for the actual production, and that kind of annoyed me. But I had all this research. I reached out to a British publisher, and that's how I sort of fell into writing more than anything while I was still doing Hollywood related things.
Yeah.
So.
And then what led you into writing about the Rangers? Obviously, somewhat your personal experience.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I've always liked history. I grew up in Germany. My aunt would cut out little soldiers out of newspapers and everything, fold over the bottom, and you kind of get into that. But the Rangers kind of made sense to me. You go to the Ranger battalions, you learn a little bit of history in the Ranger handbook and all that. And when I got out, I was on the board of the 75th Ranger Regiment Association, and I reached out to Merrill's Marauder type 6th Ranger Battalion guys, things like that. I would send them letters. This is before the heyday of the internet. You still would write letters or call people. And so they would respond and send me back envelopes. And I just started to accumulate things. But I didn't really do anything. I just accumulated. I read books and all that. And then Hollywood, really, when I felt I got a little bit burnt on the Black Hawk Down movie, not badly, just, personally, because it was Rangers. So then I started to write a little bit of history. And when I was in LA, I met a world famous photographer called Phil Stern, who had spent 6 months with the Ranger Battalion from
Snapdragon.
yeah, Snapdragon, exactly. So I was friends with him, and he had hundreds of pictures. And through him, I met a lot of the Derby Rangers that were basically on the West Coast. And I used to attend a lot of Ranger reunions at Benning, Lewis, or the World War II guys. So I just kind of met people there, and we would talk. I never formally interviewed people. I just kind of had a conversation, and they opened up very, very easily once they knew you had been in a Ranger unit.
Yeah.
So that was always the thing, right? So you talk to someone, and then they'd ask you about your background, and then you'd say, well, I served at the 2nd Ranger Battalion. And I was like, that changed the dynamic immediately. So, but that's sort of how I got into the Rangers. It's through meeting Phil Stern in LA, and he was very good friends with me. And I mean, I preserved a lot of his photographs back in the day, and he has an awesome museum in Catania, Sicily. I wanted to mention that later on. There's a whole wing in Sicily on the World War II Museum in Catania called the Phil Stern Wing. It's got all his pictures in there. Mostly Sicilian, of course, but it's a great thing. So that's sort of how I fell into that. And one of my neighbors was a Derby Ranger who then went on to the First Special Service Force, and I became good friends with Jim Altieri, who was the president of the World War II guys. So kind of like that.
It's great.
Kind of grew from there.
Yeah. What a great background and what a great book. This is Let me introduce our other guest who we've had on in the past, and that's David Hogan. David, please say hello.
Hello there.
Okay.
I just retired from the Army Center of Military History at the end of January. Glenn's timing me. Uh, well, this is actually a good mix because Mir is the guy who has actually been there in terms of being in the Ranger unit, and I'm just a egg-headed academic. But I've been interested, of course, in military history for quite some time. Went through the PhD program at Duke, and I was thinking about doing a topic for my dissertation on military education, which didn't sound too terribly exciting. And I ran into this guy, Rod Pascal, down at the Smoke Bomb Hill. You Fort Bragg veterans will know where that is. And yeah, he said, "Why don't you do something on elite troops like the Rangers?" And I'm forever indebted to Rod, bless his soul, for getting me into that subject. It certainly was an entertaining dissertation topic, and eventually, like as is the want, I turned it into a book, turned my dissertation into a book, and last I looked, that was available on Amazon for a king's ransom. But I guess that's the limited printing that Greenwood went through. Greenwood at that time was very good at publishing dissertations, that first publications for people. So, and then I also wrote the quick thing. My first book for the Army was U.S. Army Special Operations in World War II. So I touched on a lot of that too. So, Glenn, when were you starting to meet all these guys? Or Mir, when were you starting to meet all these guys?
Are you talking about the Derby guys?
Yeah,
Well, on occasion you'd have at the battalions we'd have ceremonies, right? So on occasion
yeah,
somebody would pop in. Primarily, though, it'd be the Vietnam guys.
yeah.
So,
The
but there
Lutz.
was,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. And then, like I said, mostly it was when I went to LA and I met Phil Stern.
yeah,
That was sort of the hub. From
yeah,
Phil Stern, all roads led to various Derby Rangers, and then
yeah.
of course being in the associations and Jim
Mhm,
Altieri made me a member, an associate historian of the World War II guys. So
mhm,
things like that. And I should also add that I inherited Jim Altieri's collection. Not all of it. Some of it was
mhm,
stolen when he passed, but a friend of his called and said, "Hey, I found all these other things." So I did get a
mhm,
lot of material from Jim Altieri, and I have to give a shout out to Ranger historian Bob Black, who was a Ranger
Oh,
himself,
yes. Ranger
who
Bob.
Yep, who opened up his archives to me and also at Carlisle. And he was always supportive and he said, make all the copies you want, whatever here and there. And we would exchange a lot of emails and things like that. So, but it was Phil Stern in Los Angeles where it really went, the focus shifted toward Darby instead of Merrill's or Korea, Vietnam, whatever. So
Yeah,
Well, listen, let's our enemy, as I always say, are not the Nazis, it's time. It's the
yes.
time Nazi. So let's get into the story of the World War II Rangers. It's not every aspect. And here, let me pull up this PowerPoint that David so graciously prepared. And David is going to walk us through this. And
I
um,
think you mean Mir.
I'm sorry, Mir is going to walk us
it's
through
all
this.
right.
I was just kind of like, oh,
I'm interested to hear David's interpretation of my slides. I'm like, okay, he knows a lot. I do know that. I've read all his books. So,
I,
um,
my
but
mistake.
anyway,
As I
that's all
talked
right.
to David the other day, who's David's been very gracious with his time, but he's been real busy these past couple weeks.
Yeah.
He's going to be our color commentator. Mir is going to do the play-by-play, and David's our color commentator, sort of like Frank Gifford back in the day. I tried that line, Frank Gifford, out on somebody the other day who's probably in their 40s, and they said, "Who the hell's Frank Gifford?"
Yeah,
So,
you dated yourself.
yeah.
oh boy.
Okay, the floor is yours, Mir. Let's get started.
Okay, so basically having accumulated all this material, I should give a little forward to all this. And again, I know we're limited on time, but it's kind of important. A friend of mine from the days when I was at the battalion, he eventually becomes a lawyer for SOCOM, JAG, and all that stuff. Panama veteran. he emailed me and said, hey, I was in Northern Ireland on a visit. They have a US Rangers Museum up north of Belfast in a place called Carrickfergus.
Hmm.
And the museum is looking for some help to refurbish. And, you know, I only could think of you because Rodney was his name, is his name. Always knew that I had a lot of stuff on Rangers. And so Rodney reached out to me, put me in touch with the good people over in Carrickfergus, Northern Ireland, and I got involved in that. And so when they launched the refurbishment of the museum, they had finished it, they invited me over. I went to the opening of it and I developed a great relationship with them. I think that was 2017. And so over the years, there's always that in the back of my head, you know, that the Irish are preserving our history of a ranger unit that was founded outside of the United States. Rare thing indeed. And so it is because of them and my repeat visits to Carrickfergus, Northern Ireland, that I ultimately felt I owed the Derby guys a book because I'd known so many, I'd accumulate so much stuff, and to what end? You know, I'm not an institution. I mean, all my stuff sits in the basement. So I felt I owed them a book. My agent at the time, you know, I wanted to branch out into novel writing, fiction. So I'd written it, but it's a hard sell nowadays. So he said, do nonfiction. So I put a book proposal together on Derby's Rangers, and I got a couple publishers interested, and we eventually picked one, and that's the Houdini Club. And I should give a little caveat to it. The book started out with being about 80 to 90,000 words. That's what I was commissioned for. And I know that doesn't mean a lot to people, but say it was 80 to 90,000 words. And it was going to be a sort of a history of Derby's Rangers. And I'd gone to Europe, went through all the battlefields and everything like that. And knee deep, I'm writing this book. My publisher calls me up and goes, Mir, we have this great idea. We want to do more POW stuff. My original book proposal had 2 or 3 POW stories. Now they wanted more. So I had to stop writing, do a lot more research on about 20 or 30 Ranger stories. And that's how we ended up with the Houdini Club. It's because the publisher thought that POW stories intermixed throughout the book would really make it better. And they were right. But I handed in a third more. So the book kind of grew, and that was a bit of a challenge. But anyway, the story here that we're talking about really are about the 1st, 3rd, and 4th Ranger Battalions. So it's not the famous 2nd and 5th that we see in Saving Private Ryan, for example. These are the boys who fought in the Mediterranean. And we can go to the next slide, Glenn, if you don't mind. And there are always key people involved in it. And I'm just throwing up this slide here for you guys to kind of look at it. There's, of course, General Marshall, who's tasked with, you know, modernizing the military. We're about to enter war. The key person who sort of formalized everything and was in charge was Truscott in the middle of that. And of course, he becomes a very famous general. I think it's 3rd ID eventually. And the guy who commands and is really truly responsible for what I think today's Rangers are, it began all with Darby, who was a West Point graduate, of course, artilleryman, and that'll come into play later on throughout the war. But Darby's the guy who basically handpicks his officers, like 27, I think, of them, and they all in turn then interview the 2,000, 3,000 volunteers in Northern Ireland near Carrickfergus and in Carrickfergus, and they weeded that down to about 500. If you go to the next slide, Glenn, that'd be great. Usually these 2 generals are you know, not included in a lot of talk. It's Conway and Cheney, and they're really not involved in the actual physical manifestation of this new unit, but they're the guys who had spent a lot of time with the British Commandos. And they're the ones who I feel are really responsible for the structure of the Ranger Battalion in World War II, for the 1st Ranger Battalion under Darby. We can go to the next slide, actually.
Just wanted to do a quick aside. General Conway was in my Duke graduate class after a full career in the Army.
Interesting.
Yes, he was. I interviewed him for the book too. He was a wonderful man, but I better let you continue.
No, that's fine. I mean, these guys are great. There's some great literature, some letters. I forget now if it was Cheney or Conway. I think it was Conway that who sent some letters back to Bob Black back in, I don't know, early 2000s. So it's just interesting to hear his thoughts on it. I should quickly throw in, Darby, of course, becomes very famous. He gets killed at the end of the war. artillery officer, West Point graduate. He was an aide de camp to General Hardle, who was in charge of the American Army in Northern Ireland, and he hated the paper shuffling. He hated being on staff. So he was constantly badgering his superiors to let him be in a tactical unit. He wanted to be out in the field and he wanted to fight the war. So that's the interesting thing, I think, because those are the kind of guys that ultimately are attracted to this unit. And like I said, these Conway and Cheney are responsible for the structure. Truscott is responsible for actually organizing the whole thing and getting it authorized. And on June 19, 1942, they're actually officially stood up in Carrickfergus, Northern Ireland, near the museum, actually. So that's very interesting. They still have a museum there honoring these guys. We can go to, yeah, the next slide. So the idea here was that America, green troops, no real combat experience. And they wanted to have a unit that was like the British Commandos who could go strike back at the Germans behind enemy lines and boost morale, blood American troops. And then these troops, these guys from this Ranger battalion, would go back to their original units. So they would go get bloodied in a few raids, and then they go back to their original units to spread their knowledge and their combat experience. So the 1st Ranger Battalion was always founded as a provisional unit. It was never meant to be a permanent unit. Of course, that completely changed. Now, being Americans, we're not going to call ourselves commandos like the Brits did with the Boer commandos in the wars in South Africa in the 19th century, 1900s. So we eventually came up with the name Ranger. So instead of it being the 1st American commando unit, we became the 1st Ranger Battalion. How that came about, I don't know. Bob Black once traced it back to some journalist who claimed he made that suggestion. Other people say it was a movie with Spencer Tracy that came out, Northwest Passage, about Robert Rogers and the Rangers in the French Indian War. But I don't know. So nobody actually, I don't think, knows unless David knows how the actual name came out.
Not
So,
really. I think all those things were factors. It's just Ranger was a term that was just kind of in the culture.
yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
anyway, so
you
the American,
mentioned
yeah.
Northwest Passage. So
exactly. One of the biggest, most expensive movies ever made, by the way. But in any event, so the decision was we're going to base our American unit on the British Commandos. We're going to do the same training, same mission, which is amphibious assaults, pretty much hitting enemy targets. And it was, because it was based on British Commandos, it was going to be a small unit because that was based on the boat sizes that the British Commandos were carried in. So instead of being, let's say, a company of 180 to 190, which was typical for the American World War II infantry companies, the Ranger companies were 60 to 70 men. So it was really small. And I think throughout the war, people keep forgetting that. People would plug in this battalion and this battalion, forgetting, of course, it's a small unit. It's punching above its weight, but it's a small unit. Anyway, June 19th, we're officially announced. We take off for training to Scotland, to the British Commandos. And it's basically a month. It's basically the entire month of July. We see, of course, Darby on the right with his World War I era steel pot, which will, of course, change. And we have Colonel Charles Vaughan, who becomes really instrumental. He really molds the Rangers here at Achnacarry Castle at the Commando Training Depot. And the interesting thing here is he is a World War I veteran, Vaughan is. He's participated in raids. He was afraid of this newly founded or formed Ranger American unit coming that was going to be a special unit because he didn't want them to think that he was weak or that his training wasn't hard. So he made everything even that much harder on the Rangers when they arrived there. So this was an interesting little story. But having said all that, here are some of the slides we can go through. Everything that we did, or Darby's Rangers did in that first month, is something that really the regiment today still does. Much better, of course, slightly more detailed, more specific, but the general things are still there. It's physical fitness, me and my pal, Ranger buddy, bayonet training, log drills. I mean, we still do them. You can go to the next slide, Glenn, by the way. There are some weapons. They all became proficient at the weapons training. Next slide, please, because we don't need to spend time on that. They did abseiling, they did mountain training, water, boat ops, all this kind of stuff. I mean, everything you would imagine an infantry unit to do, they did, just very hard. And the entire training was done with live ammunition, which the regiment today still does. And so you'd have, when they do boat ops, you'd have a British commando shooting at them, an expert rifleman, and he'd shoot out the paddle from their hands, something like that. They'd throw hand grenades. They'd have mines explode underwater, things like that, like while they're traversing, these toggle rope bridges and things like that. So we had, of course, one ranger who got killed. He got swept up when they were doing an amphibious assault across a river, and that was Hochtel, Company E. And that was the first casualty, but they take a lot of wounds. It's an interesting little report that Darby forwarded on to, I think, Truscott, where he's talking about this injury, that injury, shooting themselves by accident, getting shot by accident. But the funny thing is, in one of these after action reports that Darby forwarded to Hire, it said, but we have no VD. No venereal disease. And to this day, that kind of makes me laugh. I'm like, you're knee deep in training as if you have the time to go anywhere. But anyway, so the training was rigorous. And, American troops at this time didn't have this sort of training with live ammunition, these battle-hardened commandos who participated in raids and had escaped from places. So it was quite a challenge for a month. Halfway through, the Rangers were failing miserably, and Vaughan would send off these harsh letters, after action reports to Darby to tell him how terrible they were. But when Hochtel died, which was early on, something after that really hit the Rangers, and they went and really became great. So midway through their month-long training in Achnacarry in Scotland, they really pulled themselves together and became excellent at their job at that time. Here are the boats that I mentioned earlier, small landing crafts. You can see they can cram maybe 30 people in there, probably more. I mean, I know they've put in as many as 40 plus people in there, but that's why the Ranger Battalion is small. That's why Ranger companies are small, because they have to fit one entire platoon into one of those. So it was small. Next slide, please. Of course, Rangers, I think this is a great sketch by Gary Zaboli, who wrote the definite account on the Alamo, actually. It was one of them, and also on Rogers Rangers. Rangers have always done boat ops. To this day, we still do boat ops. I mean, even in Afghanistan, Iraq, modern Rangers have used boats to infiltrate and do raids, conduct raids. Next slide, please. This is a picture taken by Phil Stern, Snapdragon, and I like this picture very much because it shows you the transition. They're still doing training, but they're now in Scotland at various other places, preparing actually for the North African invasion. But here you can see the changes in their steel pots. You can see their scrolls. So what this tells us, there's a combat scroll on their right shoulder. This tells us that this happened after the raid on Dieppe, and we'll get to that in a second. And you can also see a toggle rope right there. The guy looking at us right to his front is a toggle rope. This is a commando thing, of course. So here you can see Darby's Rangers, having been trained quite a bit, after the Dieppe raid, piling into the trucks to go off to prepare for the invasion of North Africa. Next slide, please.
Let's just take this moment to pause and see if there's any questions in the chat or from our audience that we should address. Sean, I've not been able to follow the chat. Anything in there?
Al asked, curious, how is the required training today in Ranger School compared to when the Ranger requirement?
Okay, I did not attend Ranger School, but I can tell you what you need to do in order to get into the Ranger battalions. Back in my day, it was a 3-week program. So you'd go basic, advanced infantry, or whatever your military occupational specialty job would be. Then you go to airborne school. Then you went to what's called Ranger Indoctrination Program. Today, that's RASP, which is like an assessment program, and it's twice as long. During my time, it was 3 weeks. Today, it's 6 weeks. When you go through RASP, you basically do everything the boys did in World War II at Achnacarry Castle and elsewhere. Again, physical training, small arms proficiency, room clearing, boat operations, obstacle courses, live fire training exercise, raids, ambushes, things like that. And those 6 weeks that are at Fort Benning really prepare the modern Ranger to go to the Ranger Battalion and to deploy for combat. Sometime after that, I don't know what the time period now is, depends on the budget, I guess. Between 6 months to a year, the Ranger Battalion boy, Bat Boy is what they're nicknamed, will go to Ranger School for 2 months. And Ranger School is really a leadership school. You still learn all the basics of small arm tactics and everything else like that. And it solidifies your position within the Ranger Battalion. But in general terms, once you go through that initial 6-week RASP program, you are eligible to join the Ranger Battalion and you're good to go. You really have all the basics. And then it's just a matter of refining things at the battalion, because you do things differently at the battalion than at Ranger School, a little bit at least. So I hope that answered the question.
Well,
very much.
I wanted to comment too, and then I can't really make the judgment myself, but I know that there were veteran Rangers of World War II who, of course, interacted with battalions of today, of modern times, and claimed that they were very impressed with the training. They thought it was even tougher than what they had gone through. So perhaps if you're cynical enough, you can probably say, well, they just wanted to be good guests and all that, but they did say that. So
they did. As a matter of fact, I have a letter, and I think I quote some of that in the Houdini Club from a Ranger captain called Stephen Meade. And Steve Meade, after World War II, becomes a big CIA troubleshooter. You name the hotspot in the Middle East, back then, Palestine territories, Lebanon, Syria, Iran. Steve Meade was there working for the CIA. So he actually gave an address in 1972. His family made that available to me, where he talks about, he addresses the Ranger School graduating class, and he's talking about how he watched them and it really was a little bit better than what they did. But everything started with Darby's Rangers, and today's Ranger School graduates, they have a little bit more money, more training. They have the wisdom of generational combat that Rangers have brought into training. So yes, I think today's modern Ranger, post-Afghanistan and Iraq, that group are probably some of the best soldiers ever in the United States military history.
I imagine a lot of it has to do with the base, how many people you have to narrow down to the certain number you want.
Yeah.
And how much Darby faced with that, your account in the Houdini Club is illuminating on that, in the sense that the people who did wash out and those who stuck around, and there was apparently a pretty good attrition rate.
Yeah, there is. And in any elite unit, as you know, there is an attrition rate. First, to get in, and then B, the work is so hard. Every day you're pounding, right? You're taking physical punishment. So you will definitely lose a lot of people because of that. And the World War II guys, of course, lost a lot of them there too. So
do you know what the attrition rate was for Darby's Rangers in that first round of training?
In the first round of training, I think they had just under 500, and I think they graduated, don't quote me, 440 maybe.
Oh, so
something like that.
Yeah.
Right. But the difference was they interviewed all these guys and they picked 500 and they put them through the ringer. So they did a lot of running. They did a lot of calisthenics to prepare for the commando training depot. But they did take casualties. But the biggest loss of men comes after their initial actual combat operation in North Africa, where they lose about 20% of people. But we'll get there. But they weren't killed. Those are people who got kicked out and quit. So
we'll get into that.
Yeah.
Sean, anything else before we continue? Anybody
I don't see
else?
anything in the chat, but if anybody has a hand to raise or question to ask and would like to just wave their hand, I'm looking at everyone's screen here. Keep waving your hand if you have a question. No, I think we're good. Oh, Justin Miller. Never mind.
Justin?
Let me get you on mute, Justin. Hold on. My screen's going. Oh, you. Let me ask you to unmute, Justin.
Yep.
There you go.
At this point, my question would be a comparison between all of the special service forces, from the Rangers to the Navy SEALs to the special forces, whatever. How does that training in general compare one to the other?
Are we talking about modern days?
Well, even back then or today, but in general terms, at the time, what was the other? There was another group besides the Rangers, weren't there? There were Canadian, U.S.
Yep,
Were those-
the Devil's Brigade, yes.
Yeah. So I'm just sort of curious to say, what might the differences be between the objective and the training to get there before we get down the road 4 miles?
Dave, do you want to tackle this?
Well, I think a lot of it, of course, is driven by the purpose of the unit, and all these different units have. I trying to figure the context you want this in, whether current or World War II. In World War II, you had all kinds of these special units, like the origins of UDTs, which would later become the SEALs. You have the first Special Service Force, which is very similar to the Rangers in that it's designed to conduct raids. In fact, it's designed to conduct a particular raid, which in Norway, which never came off. And that gets into all these other things about the search for a proper mission for these guys. But in terms of training, I think in a lot of ways, the Ranger training was similar to that of the first Special Service Force. The biggest difference would have been that the first Special Service Force was designed to operate in Norway. So they had the ski training out at
Yep.
Fort William Henry Harrison out of Montana.
Mhm.
So the Rangers, and you have to realize too, Darby's Rangers, that's an amphibious force. It's built around amphibious, whereas today's Rangers jump out of planes, helicopters, all that sort of thing. These guys were not airborne at the time. That's an aspect of training.
Okay.
So you start to get into all these different arguments over who's tougher than who, which is kind of at the center of the whole Ranger ethos.
Yes.
And well, yeah, any of these topics we can go on forever. But
Yeah,
I
I'm a
should
little
probably
worried.
let Mir.
I
little
have
worried
strong opinions.
The time factor.
Yeah, I'll go. I would like to answer that very quickly, and we can make up time as we go because we're not going to be able to cover the entire history of Darby's Rangers, but we can hit some things. I will say this: the interesting thing about the Devil's Brigade is that they were going to be disbanded in 1944 sometime because of a lack of recruits. They just could not fill the ranks like any, call it special unit or unit that had extra training. It's hard to fill the ranks. So what happened is eventually a lot of Rangers go and are transferred to the Devil's Brigade. In modern times, the key thing to remember is this. During my time, and it's changed a little bit with the current, well, no longer current wars, but the most recent conflicts. In my time, the Ranger Battalion's job was to seize airfields. It was a direct action mission to come in, more or less seize an objective, kill anything in its path if needed to, hold it for follow-on forces. The SEALs had a slightly different job, even though they come sea, air, land, like they always say. They are still mostly maritime based and they're smaller units. You have, of course, a force recon that's mostly reconnaissance missions. And then you, of course, have Delta, which is also very precise, probably arguably the greatest military unit in the world. And it's made up of 50% Rangers, I think, even still to this day. So it's all just slightly different missions, but the same. And when you look at special forces, the Green Berets, like John Wayne's Green Berets, their job primarily is a small unit of 12 men in an A team to work with locals to build up a resistance kind of a thing. So the missions are all a little bit different. But for me, because I'm prejudiced, my Ranger background, I think Delta, I'm a US Army guy. I think Delta is the greatest unit on the planet. And I think the Ranger battalions are very close next to them. So, and
Mir,
sealed of that. Yes.
Here, watch out for any Marines coming up from Pittsburgh.
Semper Fi,
Your
Semper
front
Fi.
door who might want to have a discussion with you.
I still have friends. Some of them are in the Marine Corps, but anyway.
Well,
Anyway.
let's jump back into World War II.
Yes, thank you very much for something close enough for government work, okay?
Okay. Okay, so this map is from the book, and this is just to give you a really rough overview of some of the things the Rangers did, because we don't have the time to hit every single thing. Up north, you can see Carrickfergus, of course. That's where they were formed. 50 Rangers go to Dieppe, which is in France, along with the British Canadians, which was, of course, one of the most disastrous attacks ever of all time. It killed something like 60-70% of every Canadian unit, British unit. From the 50 Rangers who accompanied them, only 40 did not land. 10, I think, landed. Of those 10, 3 get killed in Dieppe. 1 gets seriously wounded, POW camp, and dies a few years later back home after the war. So I considered 4 casualties at Dieppe. But Dieppe wasn't really a bloodying for American troops. That was a British-Canadian fiasco, and those boys paid. Really, they got slaughtered on the beaches. For us, the first major combat for Darby's Rangers takes place in Arzew, Algeria. And our job there is basically to take the port to allow it to be used for follow-on forces. The key thing about Rangers to this day is every Ranger will know the details of the mission and the higher mission. So you will know your squad level, your platoon level, your company level, and your battalion level. You will know the basic information, of course, more detailed as you go down toward your actual job on the mission. So every Ranger will know the job. So if your boss gets killed, you can step in and take over the job. This is a key thing, drilled into you all the time. And Rangers are always fit. So our job at Arzew is to take out 2 gun batteries, which we do. And what Darby does, he divides his 1st battalion of 6 companies, and some of them go into the port, take out a gun battery there, and Darby himself lands further up north of the other gun battery that overlooks the harbor, and they take it out. They're very successful. And the Rangers take, I think, 1 casualty right there at Arzew. The interesting thing is when you read some of the letters and whatever conversations or books, some people even wrote memoirs, which is great. They talk about instant looting. So there are guys who come in and they secure the warehouse, and then one of them takes off to look for whatever he can find, alcohol usually. So I always found that very interesting. But the Rangers are extremely successful. They do a great job at night, even though one of their landing craft absolutely crashes and they lose a lot of equipment. They do a great job. And there are the details of the 2 main forces. Dammer Force. Dammer was Darby's right-hand man, and Darby himself led the other one. And like I said, they took out 2 main gun batteries successfully, quickly, took 1 casualty, killed in action. And I put in Gino Mercuriali, who is one of my favorite Darby Rangers, only because of how he spelled invaded Arzew. And this is directly from some of the stuff he sent me. He sent me floppy disks, not back in the day, those little hard floppy disks, and I got some of that stuff from them. He's a little bit wrong. It was a longer than a 5-mile march with Darby's force. I think it was like 12 kilometers, 12 miles maybe. I forget now which, but they do it at night, and they're ultimately very successful. Really just bang on, train for this job, take it out. Great job. They have a couple follow... Sorry.
One of the you keep mentioning at night, and I just want to emphasize these first amphibious attacks in North Africa, Sicily, and I believe Salerno all started at night.
Always. That's a Ranger thing. Absolutely. 100%.
Mm-hmm.
This is a great picture to show you how small a company is. This is Roy Murray, who's a legendary Darby Ranger officer. That's F Company, right after Arzew. And you can see it's probably 60, 70 guys. I've never counted it, but it's a small unit. And remember this as we go through it. You know, they're going to be tossed into these battles. And I think commanders often go, we have a Ranger battalion. And then they think it's like 3 times its size, and it's not. And it's hard to replace these guys because they've been trained specially. Darby never thought of them as elite. I don't think. He always said, we're just infantry with great training or special training. And some of them thought they were supermen. I think he puts that in the book that Glenn mentioned earlier. You can go to the next slide. What happens in North Africa, though, before we go into Tunisia, which is a great raid, actually, we'll talk about this in detail. While they're still in Algeria, for 3 months there, they're doing dog and pony shows, and it disillusions a lot of guys. And out of the 450 guys, let's say 100 basically quit or get fired. There's also some desertion and some real hooliganism type stuff. And Darby actually took off his coat one day and beat the snot out of a disobedient ranger. Think about that. A West Point officer took off his jacket and went at it with this loud-mouthed enlisted guy. It's very interesting. Another officer shot between the legs of another ranger. But 106 guys got basically let go or quit after Arzu, and they got replaced and they got trained up. And they participate in the raids in Tunisia, where we have the Kasserine Pass and all that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but there are two great battles here for the Rangers. There are a few more, but Senet Station and El Gatar. And the job here is to march overland in the middle of the night and attack, in this case, Italian fortified positions, gun positions in their backs, to open up the pathway for Allied forces to go through. And so you can go to the next slide, actually. So these are great things. These are Roy Murray sketches, I believe, that I got from his son. His son is also called Roy Murray, who was a special forces officer and retired a few years back. He opened up his archives to me. It's very nice. And we're not going to deal with this, but basically what it was is this is the first time I think Darby marched his guys in the middle of the night, the companies, over hostile terrain, up these mountain ranges. You can take the wrong step and you'll fall to your death, kind of a thing. And they successfully drove Italian positions out and killed most of them. They took almost no prisoners. I think the job was to take 10 prisoners. They had 13 and they killed the other 3. And we also have ferocious bayonet charges by Darby's Rangers under a guy called Lieutenant Charles Schunstrom. And it's real hand-to-hand fighting here, some of it, Officers take their little commando dagger in one hand, the 45 in the other, and they'd go forward leading their men. They'd shoot Italians, they'd cut their throats, stab them in the kidney. Roy Murray, whose company we saw earlier, I saw his actual commando dagger, and the tip had broken off. And his son said this was from the time either at Senet or El Gatar, I think it was Senet, where his dad drove that thin blade into an Italian and snapped it off on a bone. So I saw that thing, and it's like, it's quite something. But anyway, the Rangers do a superb job here.
Yeah, chilling, I'm sure. And I just want to emphasize, and maybe our audience would know this, at the time, night marches and night attacks like that were just not done. I mean, Correct. This was incredibly unusual at that time. Mm-hmm. And the distance they covered in the however many hours they had was really attributed to, in some ways, I always like to make this point because Lucian Truscott is one of my favorite generals of World War II. What they called the Truscott trot.
Yes.
Which was the ability for these troops with equipment to march at 15, I think it was 15 minutes per mile. So they could cover 4 miles in 1 hour. Do I have that right?
I don't remember the exact speed. I have it in the Houdini Club. I broke it down actually, so I have forgotten. But yes, the Truscott Trot was basically what the Rangers really became famous for to a degree was that they could outmarch anybody. Yeah. That was the blistering road marches, and it's actually detailed in the early parts of the book that really prepped them for these kinds of missions. And I want to say
it's probably no accident Truscott was also a cavalryman by background.
He made everybody run as quickly as a horse.
He wanted to be like Stonewall Jackson, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and he had the same impact on the Third ID because the Third ID was the Truscott Trot.
Yeah. I also want to give a shout out to Terry Allen. I know he gets a rough reputation on occasion, but I think Allen and Darby were proponents for nighttime fighting. because it avoids casualties also. So, but in any event, we can go to the next slide. So the Rangers are the best, greatest military fighting unit in the world. Having proved to Hire that they did a great job, even at Dieppe, some of the guys did a good job that actually landed. They did a great job at Arzew. They did a phenomenal job in Tunisia with their night raids. They were considered by Patton to be the best combat soldiers of North Africa at one point. So Hire decides, well, we have one battalion, so we must make it bigger. And 2nd Ranger Battalion, in the meanwhile, has been stood up at in I think Florida it was. Don't quote. Yeah, I think it's Florida. And they, by the way, they had a couple cadre from Darby's Rangers who had gotten injured or whatever. 1 or 2 of them went over there to help train them. So they decide, Hire decides they want to have more Ranger battalions for the impending invasion of Sicily. So they create the 3rd and 4th Ranger Battalion. And basically what happens, the original 1st Ranger Battalion of 400 some odd men is now divided. They have 6 companies. And so they divide those 6 companies into 3 battalions to create a cadre, a corps of veteran soldiers. And they go to all the replacement depots, recruit a bunch of guys, and I think they have something like 3 months to prep for the Sicilian invasion. What has happened, though, or what will happen, and we'll see this in Sicily, is the Ranger battalions start to get heavy. Originally, they were purely an amphibious assault, light weapons. Changes were made to their operational equipment list. Instead of having, a heavy 30 caliber machine gun, they went with the bar, for example. But they get heavier. So Darby, being an artillery guy, eventually gets 81 millimeter mortars. He also gets the 83rd Chemical Mortar Battalion to come join him, all that. This will all happen a little bit now as they're standing up these other battalions, but certainly in Sicily and after Sicily, these Ranger battalions become heavy. They also get 4 half-tracks with 75 millimeter cannons. They'll get those in Sicily after they invaded Sicily. So the point to remember, small battalions, they're still small units, and they're getting heavier equipment. They have a little bit of armored track support, things like that. Now, the interesting thing here is, and anybody who knows something about the military, is you really need a headquarters company to run all these battalions. Darby is not given that. These units are all provisional. He's not given a regimental headquarters. So he still commands 1st Ranger Battalion, and he still has to command all 3 Ranger battalions. Lucky for him, he picked great officers, great enlisted men, great non-commissioned officers. So the transition was okay. I think they did very well. They have 3-4 months. We can go to the next slide. They go into Sicily. And I'm going to just quickly skim through this. The Rangers, the 1st and 4th Ranger Battalion, take Gela, which you will see, if you can see it, yeah. It's basically the right city there. They take that. The 3rd Ranger Battalion will take the city to the left called Licata. The interesting thing here is the 1st and 4th Ranger Battalion at Gela take some real casualties on the beach. There are mines, there's opposition. The Italians actually do a halfway decent job of it. The Rangers do take it. They do move to the edge of town. There's fierce fighting, and there we'll look at a few slides in a second. But Patton comes on shore as the Germans and Italians counterattack. And some historians said it's because of Patton that the Rangers managed to hang on and hold on. I don't think that's true. But having said that, Rangers do a great job. They take casualties. They seize the town, heavy fighting in the town, house to house, rooftop to rooftop. They go to the edge of town. The Italians launch some ferocious counterattacks. The Germans do too. The Brits, of course, on the right side are also advancing. But this is modern day Gela. I was there last year, and you can see the beach on the top left. And that pier that you see in the distance on the left, that got blown up, by the way, as we landed there. And we took some casualties. We had a couple of our assault landing craft sunk, and there were lots of mines there. We took a few casualties. The picture on the top right is the square. There's a big cathedral on the right. Huge fighting there, like lots of fighting. And still to this day, when you drive around Gela, you can see these pillboxes that overlook the port and all that, and Gela. Next slide, please. And there you can see the picture on the left. taken right after the following day after the night amphibious raid and attack into the town, and you can see all the casualties there. And to the right it's still the same thing. There are almost no changes to the town. So if you happen to have the ability to go Sicily, of course, I'm prejudiced. Go to follow the ranger things, right? Go to Gela. It's great. Anyway, point is, 1st and 4th Ranger Battalion take Gela, fight off counterattacks. They call in the Navy support. They do a great job liaising with naval gunfire support, and they hammer these Italians. I mean, it's criminal almost how these Italians were exposed and got killed. Same with some of the Germans. Licata with 3rd Ranger Battalion, good mission. They have a little bit of enemy opposition there. The beach is divided into 2 things by this major rock that has a few anti-gun pillboxes, but they're successful and they take Licata. So now the Allied forces have landed. Rangers have secured their towns. The Rangers are tasked, if we go back maybe to the Sicily map. Oh, yeah, we can do this one. Butera. So the Ranger Battalion is tasked, the 1st and 4th are tasked with taking this mountain fortress called Butera. The battalion surgeon, I think of 1st Ranger Battalion, calls this a Disney-like mountain fortress. And I went there, and it's incredible. When you get to that old town up there, and you got to drive this, it's a better road now than it was back in the day. And you can see, literally, you can see Gela, you can see everything. You can see how vital it was for the Allied forces to send a unit that could take this, called Butera. It's literally it's closer to Gela than to Licata. They had to take these high points just to avoid Germans and Italians looking over and sending shells downrange into the Allied landing forces. So they take it out. Schunstrom, again, my favorite guy who led that bayonet charge at Tzenet Station, goes in there, murders a couple POWs on his approach up there. They captured 3, and he made his scouts kill 2, and he killed 1 as they climbed up, and they go in, again, block-to-block fighting, hard, bar machine guns, bayonets, grenades. It's close quarter battle. There maybe the population maybe was 350 to 500 people, very small, very tight. Maybe 4 main blocks, northwest, southeast, whatever, north, south, east, west. So it's a small thing, and they had maybe 100, 150 Italians and Germans in there. So it's a brutish fight, but they took it at night, climbed the steep hill, and there had been carnage as they marched all the way to Butera from all the naval gunfire when they defeated all the Italian things. So they're skeletal remains, blown body parts, all that as they're marching up there in the middle of the night. Anyway, 1st and 4th Ranger Battalion sees that. So their job is mostly done. They still do a lot of other things. Meanwhile, Patton decides that he wants to take Messina because he doesn't want Montgomery to cut up straight from the eastern side of Sicily to Messina, and Patton wants to take it. So what happens is the 3rd Ranger Battalion was also tasked with taking out a town called Porto Empedocoli, which is to the left of Licata. And they do this by marching north, cutting west, coming south, and not attacking it directly. So they seize that also, long marches. They have a bunch of encounters. They ambush a bunch of Italians. There's a firefight, but they seize the port. And now they are tasked with accompanying Patton as he drives from Palermo to Messina. So the 3rd Ranger Battalion gets a bunch of mules, and they go from west to east, and they cover the mountains, the right flank of Patton as he drives toward Messina. And it's a horrible thing. They're in the mountains. All their mules die. They all step off the ledge. It's not even that they get killed by enemy fire. Some of them do, but mostly it's just treacherous terrain. And the Rangers do well. Darby accompanies them on occasion. And eventually, as we all know, Sicily falls. Patton makes it to Messina before Montgomery. And the 1st and 4th Ranger Battalion and 3rd Ranger Battalion get to go to Corleone, like the mafia town, and they refit to go into the next campaign, which takes place 3 to 4 weeks later, which is to go to mainland Italy. The key thing to remember here, Darby got hit with counterattacks, and he has only the Navy to rely on for support. That's why he wants more artillery.
If we could pause here, Mir, before we
Yeah.
jump into the Italian campaign. It's straight up 8 o'clock. Sean, should we do our station break and then entertain questions from the audience?
Sure. And I see Don Patton, you have your hand raised. We'll get to you in just a minute. I'll unmute you now so we can prep for that. I'll jump over and do our little station break real quick. First and foremost, I want to thank UPMC for Life for being a sponsor of the VBC. You can check out all your plan options by visiting upmchealthplan.com/Medicare. They have plans designed by veterans for veterans that are there to save you money. So check them out. And thank you, UPMC for Life, for supporting us. We also, see if I get the thing. I have a free VBC magazine. This is a free quarterly magazine. I mentioned this at the beginning of the program. You can check this out on our website, veteransbreakfastclub.org, or if you'd like a paper copy of this, I know that it just got done printing. I got a big box here as well. But we print up and send out about 12,000 of these and print up another 5,000 to 7,000 more that we hand distribute. So if you'd like to get one, please send us your address. We're happy to get you on our mailing list. Again, it's a free quarterly magazine filled with historical anecdotes, veteran stories, really wonderful magazine. So please check it out. We have some programs coming up. This one I'm super excited by. This one is coming up on Monday. Wayne Vassant is going to be joining us. Years ago, whenever I first started with the VBC, I was running the Scuttlebutt podcast. And during that, I was prompted by someone, hey, why don't we bring on one of the artists of the NOM? I did as much research as I could possibly do to find the gentleman and bring him on. I couldn't find him anywhere. Well, Todd ended up meeting him. So Todd asked him to come on and he agreed. So we're going to talk with him on Monday. Really excited by that. For those of you who remember the comic book. And then we're going to be talking about General Leslie Groves and the Manhattan Project coming up on next Thursday with Glenn. Looking forward to that program. And the return of our Jeopardy. If you have watched Jeopardy, you love Jeopardy, and then you always think, you know what, there needs to be more military history on Jeopardy. Well, this is the place to come, and this is the time to do it. It is a lot of fun because not only do we dive into some sort of obscure military facts, but sometimes Todd gets it wrong. And that's a lot of fun to make fun of him about. But also, it's just an enjoyable night. Bring drinks and try to beat Dave Seaver and Greg Yost at Jeopardy. But yeah, good stuff coming up. And thank you all for listening to the station break.
And David Hogan, no PhDs allowed on our Jeopardy program. No ringers.
Piled higher and deeper.
But before we take questions, is there anything, Dave, you want to add to the Sicily campaign or anything? Because you know I ramble on, and you're too polite to cut me off.
Well, you're not rambling. I find the whole issue of misuse is covering over. One word that you used that's really essential is provisional. These are temporary units. The Rangers that you served in, the current day Rangers, that's part of the force structure, the formal force structure. And at one point, as you said, these guys were supposed to go back to their original units.
Yeah.
They were spread their expertise. That's a repeating theme in Ranger history. Yeah, they're just there to get their experience conducting commando raids and then go back. And the mission evolves. The mission changes. Hey, we've got this great unit. We don't want to disband it any more than the Marines want to disband the Marines. You want to keep that unit cohesion, take advantage of the unit cohesion that you've built. And so in effect they have to go around selling the mission. And one of the key points you made is that Darby is a field artilleryman, and he's not mentally attached to the notion that this is an elite unit for the sake of being an elite unit. You know, yeah. I think you explained it well. He wants to get into combat. You know, this is his way of doing it. And once he's in combat, he thinks a lot in terms of fire support. That's his background. And but then in a sense, the Rangers are kind of entrepreneurs because they have to hunt around for missions. And when they don't have them, you know, basically what Darby's Rangers ends up doing is amphibious spearheaders.
Yes, absolutely.
They do the amphibious landings. They seize key points just like you seized airfields.
Yeah.
And but what do you do in that period in between when you're not taking key points in an amphibious landing? Not to what degree are you operating just as regular infantry, where if you have 60 men in your company, you're going to be combat ineffective pretty quickly if you.
Absolutely. Very hard to replace people. Very tough.
And particularly since, well, you get into this in your book as you go along, the problem of a unit that actually gets into combat in Italy. And then there's no formal replacement structure for Rangers. And this gets into the debate, which I get into in my book, on and on, just, well, we're going to form them from this mission. And then this mission no longer exists or changes. And you end up, what is the most, from the Army's point of view, what is the most efficient use of these troops?
Yeah. And we'll get to that in mainland Italy. So,
yeah.
Don Patton had a question.
Actually, I wanted to supplement something. I think the number was like 50 to 60% of the 1st Ranger Battalion came out of the 34th Division, which was the Iowa, Minnesota unit that was in Northern Ireland. It was the first American unit on foreign soil. Until 2002 or 3, every first Saturday we got together a group of those veterans. Don Frederick, Zane Shippey, the Rangers had a reunion up in northern Iowa up until, I don't know, 2002, 2003. I actually had dinner 2 evenings with Roy Murray. And,
awesome.
And I actually gave the eulogy at Don Frederick's. And one of the pictures I was in hopes you'd be showing tonight was that picture of him on the turret of that gun turret over Arzu. But this is just a speculation. But most of these 34th Division guys that were selected were farm boys.
Yeah.
They were used to shooting. They were used to the outdoors. So it was just a matter of adapting their natural hunting and kind of outdoor survival skills to a military purpose. So I felt very lucky to have experienced that for probably 10 or 12 years. So, yeah.
Fantastic. I want to say that your background looks like my office. So,
well, I have run the World War II Roundtable. I'm just finishing our 39th year. And so I go through probably 100 books every year. And I will tell you that one of the programs that we have committed for our spring of 39, a gentleman by the name of Flint Whitlock has a brand new book coming out, and it's Patton in Sicily.
Yeah, he wrote on Anzio, I think.
He did the Rock of Anzio, which is a history.
And another one on that, yeah.
And then he did the breakout at which gets into, I hope you'll talk about Cisterna, which is one of the turning points. So I'll drop off here. I'll drop off.
Just a real quick, sorry.
No, in fact, we'd like to jump back into the Italian campaign so we can get to Cisterna.
Yeah. I wanted to add to it that you had a lot of farmers, absolutely. You had a lot of hunters, and you had pimps, moonshiners, all sorts of people that joined the Rangers. But solidly, a lot of them came from the Midwest. That's absolutely true. So, in any event, Sicily. So Darby recognizes that they're going to be going into mainland Italy, and he wants heavier punch. So therefore now he has called a cannon company, the Ranger Cannon Company, which is 4 half tracks with captured 75 millimeter artillery pieces mounted on it to give him a little more of a punch. He's got his 83rd Chemical Battalion with him that gives you the 4.2-inch heavy mortars. So he's getting heavier. The mission here is very simple, actually. The main landing by the British and US troops is going to be to the right of or south of Salerno. The commandos are going to be just to the left of Salerno. They're going to seize those mountain passes there. And the 1st, 3rd, and 4th Ranger Battalion are going to seize the rest of the mountain passes along the Amalfi Coast. The key area they landed in was Maiori, and Maiori does not have sandy beaches. So if, like in Dieppe, if that had been defended by the Axis forces, the Italians had quit meanwhile, had surrendered. But if that had been defended, the Rangers could not have dug into that ground, just like at Dieppe, the Canadians couldn't dig in either. But fortunately for the Americans, there was no opposition whatsoever. They land at Maiori, and the battalions, the 1st and 3rd, push straight up to seize the high ground along the Chionzi Pass. So one battalion is on the left side, one battalion is on the right side. And Roy Murray, his 4th Ranger Battalion, is tasked with Minori and Amalfi to go protect the left flank of those 2 Ranger Battalions that have to hold that Chionzi Pass and keep eyes on German reinforcements coming into Salerno. So that was their mission there, basically. And that's the Sorrento Peninsula to the left. That's basically the Ranger area of operations. Now, that's an old picture that I got from Roy Murray, from his son. I think it is from his son. Yes, of Maiori, what it looked like then. And that's a picture that I took of right in the middle of town where there's a World War II statue, and you can see the plaque dedicated to the 1st, 3rd, and 4th Ranger Battalions who landed there. So this is really cool. Anyway, next slide, if you don't mind. So that's a modern picture of Maori I took from a boat, and you can see the pass just up there. You can see how important it is to seize that terrain. So they land on that beach and they climb their way up there, and 2 battalions go up that way with 2 half tracks, and 4th Ranger Battalion goes off to the left down this narrow highway, which doesn't have a pedestrian walk to this day, by the way, but everybody walks on it. So if you go there, be careful. There are lots of cars blowing by you. And they also get 2 half tracks. So the job of the 1st and 3rd is to seize that mountaintop, hold on to it. And the 4th Battalion on the left is there to protect those 2 battalions and to hold on to whatever high ground they need to do that to stop any German reinforcements from coming that way. The building on the right was heavily used during the Second World War by Darby and his naval gunfire liaisons, and that included British as well as Americans. So they would sit in there, look down this pass, and call for fire with the naval gunfires or mortars or whatever they had. Like Schunstrom was leading the Ranger half track, so he would pull out from hiding and shoot at Germans until he would get counter battery fire. Then he'd pull back, exposing the Rangers in their tiny little holes, of course, to enemy gunfire. But that would allow the forward observers to locate German counter batteries, which then the Navy, US Navy, would come and destroy. So that's kind of the entire mission over there. And I think it was hugely successful, but it was quite challenging. Ultimately, Salerno is stuck, more or less. I mean, they advance a little bit, but the Germans sort of retreat, and they have a bunch of successive defensive lines cutting across the Italian foot, basically the boot. So they go all the way up to Rome, and they're building natural defenses, right? They have rivers that need to be crossed. The Germans will reinforce them. There are mountain ranges the Germans will dig in, that kind of thing. So there are 5 to 7, I think, of these, Gustav Line, Bernhard Line, things like that. And the first one is called the Winter Line, and the Rangers are deployed there after a short break and to refit at Venafro. Venafro is a small town. It's got rail, highway, and the Rangers are now being used. They're now heavier, of course. They have half tracks. They have heavier. They have the 83rd supporting them. They're now used like I would call it like a standard infantry battalion. And of course, again, remember, they're small. They have a lot of casualties because they caught malaria from the mosquitoes in Sicily. There are a lot of injuries, simple things. It's not always a combat injury. It's a sprained ankle, it's a broken leg, it's whatever. So you take casualties throughout, and it's challenging to replace and train. So you do have a lot of Rangers joining who get minimal training. And there are times at the winter line where they're fighting Germans probably 10, 15 feet away, throwing hand grenades, closing as quickly as they can, retreating as quickly as they can. It's really a meat grinder. And everybody, all the Americans up and down this line are getting hammered and are hammering the Germans. It's really brutal mountain warfare. Now, some of the Rangers take offense when they say we weren't trained for these missions, because I always feel, it's mountain warfare and you're basically just doing regular infantry work. And they sort of agree with that. But at the same time, they're like, but we have trained for mountain warfare. We are accustomed to trying to take out strong points in mountains. They did it at Senet in Tunisia, at El Ghoutar. The 3rd Ranger Battalion was in the mountain ranges up in Sicily. So there's a little bit of that talk with some of the old timers back in the day. But ultimately, the Rangers do a good job, but they suffer enormously. There's Trenchfoot, Gino Mercuriali, my favorite guy, one of my favorite guys, who's been an original Derby Ranger. He gets Trenchfoot. So that ends his time. And he was at Dieppe, he didn't land, but it takes a toll on him. This is Old Town Venafro, and there's a great museum there. So if you go to Venafro, there's a wonderful museum by Luciano Bucci, I think is his name. He was my tour guide. He took me all over the place. And this is where the Rangers would hang out in between missions and try to recover and that kind of stuff. But they were spread thin. Ultimately, they were thrown to Naples, and they are preparing now to refit to go land at Anzio. What's the idea behind Anzio? Well, the Allies are stuck coming up these broad mountains defensive lines. So the idea is, and you can see it right there, yeah. So the idea is we're going to bypass these one or two of these mountain lines and aim to land at Anzio, to send some of our troops south to link up with the Allies pushing from the south up north, and also go to Rome. Sort of that's kind of the idea here. I don't know if that was a good idea, but as is, the idea was they hoped they could split the German forces. I think this is a Whitlock map, by the way, since we spoke about him earlier. So the idea is simply a landing at Anzio will mean the Germans are going to have to retreat, or at least split their forces to tackle with this new invasion. Glenn and I had talked about this earlier, and I'm sure David has things to say about this. We got to remember D-Day in Normandy, in 5 months is going to happen. So a lot of materiel is going for that invasion. So
LSTs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And also manpower, right? So it's harder to find men. And we got to remember during Sicily, I think it was, maybe it was Sicily. Yeah, there started to be a manpower shortage for the units in the Mediterranean. So
units
anyway,
generally all over the Army, 43.
Under great controversy by Churchill, at least, or great complaint by Churchill, we withdraw 5 divisions from the Mediterranean and move them to England in preparation for D-Day.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So the idea is, I think they still have enough to do something, but at the same time, what they didn't count on is the morale of the enemy. I think there's always been this thing that the Germans are going to retreat, right? They have Americans to the south coming up. Now they have this landing. The Germans are just going to retreat. I think that was sort of the thinking. I don't know for sure, but I think that's true because I'm not an expert on the actual campaign. I do the Ranger stuff. But the idea is, like I said, to split the Germans. Of course, the Germans are having none of this. They've been losing quite a bit, North Africa, Sicily. I mean, North Africa was like a Stalingrad to them, really. They lost that much equipment and manpower there. But the Germans are rushing reinforcements down here from all over Europe. They reconstitute units and they are rushing them down. Every 5 seconds, somebody's moving down there. I'm exaggerating, but they're going to fight here. So the Germans are rushing troops down. Some of them are veteran units. Some of them, like the rest of them, Allied troops are, have to be regenerated, reconstituted, have some new guys in them, but they still all have a core of veteran, experienced guys who've been at war since 39, So anyway, Rangers land, easiest landing in the world. That's Derby's point of landing. It's the White Casino, that pier, is center of the beach that they land on. It's a beautiful sandy beach, by the way. So the Rangers land, no opposition whatsoever. The Germans blow up a bunch of things. 10 days later or so, a week, 10 days later, the Allies are stuck. They're not expanding their beachhead fast enough. Germans are rushing reinforcements in. The Allies decide we're going to push out. The Allies are going to push out of Anzio, out of that area. And you can see on this map, the Rangers are tasked with taking Cisterna, which is a highway and a rail hub. This is key. And elements of the 3rd ID, I think 7th and 15th Infantry Regiment are on either side, and they're tasked with interdicting that highway as the Rangers seize Cisterna. So the 1st and 3rd Ranger Battalion are tasked with approaching Cisterna, and you can see that on the left-hand map. The top ones are the companies of the 1st Ranger Battalion, the bottom is the 3rd Ranger Battalion, and they're tasked with seizing Cisterna. The 1st Ranger Battalion's mission is to not engage anyone, to simply get into Cisterna as fast as possible, eliminate any resistance in there, allow the 3rd Ranger Battalion that's trailing to come and knock out any German opposition. And the 4th Ranger Battalion is going to come 2 hours later up the single road from the south, which is Conca, through another small farmstead to Cisterna. You can see it. Isola Bella is the small farmstead. It's really just like 6 buildings or something like that. It's nothing. And it's called a bunch of things on maps, but that's commonly what it is. So 1st and 3rd take off. They have a problem immediately. 3 radios somehow don't end up with the battalions. They end up back with Darby near Conca, where his regimental headquarters is overseeing. I should say that Darby, for this Anzio invasion, was given a regimental headquarters, by the way. So now he's in command of all battalions, and he has 3 battalion commanders handling
provisional.
Yeah, still provisional, but at least there's a headquarters now.
At least there's something.
Yeah, so anyway, so they're tasked with that. The biggest flaw was 3rd ID intelligence had, I think, mostly everything correct. They knew who was there. They knew the numbers. They had some rough idea of all these things. Their biggest mistake was interpreting it. They thought the main line of resistance of the Germans would be well past Cisterna, closer up into the mountain ranges. Their thinking was the Germans would retreat because Americans have so much more equipment, so much more gunpowder, artillery power, aircraft, whatever it is that was needed, right? So the interpretation was just wrong. The main line of resistance is well before Cisterna, and 1st Battalion runs smack into them. They take out a couple sentries with knives, commando style and everything. There's a little bit of noise. They can hear German troops as they're marching in the middle of the night up these canals to get there because it's flat. It's like a billiard table. I mean, there's no cover here, no concealment, really. The only place you could go is into ditches. Some of them might be a few feet high, 5 feet high, and others are just a foot or 2 feet high. So they have to go through there, and it's bitterly cold, of course. And the Rangers, I feel, did a really great job infiltrating. Eventually, they bump, of course, into a 100-plus strong German unit that was bivouacking, asleep. They tried to remove the sentries quietly, didn't work out, and they just charged through that bivouac and start getting into this gunfight. The 3rd Ranger Battalion, in the meanwhile, suffers an enormous loss when a German tank that's going up and down this road kills the battalion commander and his command staff. So the 3rd Ranger Battalion almost immediately at the start of this loses its entire command staff. Having said that, like I said, the Rangers know what to do. It still takes a little bit of time for them to get organized. And eventually they'll join the 1st Battalion, which is now besieged between German lines. And you can see there's a triangle just south of Cisterna. And about 10 to 12 Rangers make it to Cisterna. Most of them, I think, get killed. Some might have gotten captured, others retreated. But basically what happens is the 1st Ranger Battalion handles the north part of this triangle with elements of the 3rd Ranger Battalion, and the rest of the companies from the 3rd Ranger Battalion form a perimeter to the south, basically creating a perimeter, and the Germans are all around them. The advantage of the Germans is they've been rushing in troops, airborne troops, Hermann Goering Division, tanks, half-tracks, mechanized infantry. And the Germans, I mean, they were there at the right time at the the wrong time for the Rangers. The Rangers eliminate a bunch of tanks, kill a ton of Germans. I mean, they do, and ultimately the German tanks, they go, when they're out of ammo, they go back to get resupplied, come back up and down all these roads and just keep pummeling the Rangers. Rangers are running out of ammunition. Allied forces can't even move ahead. 4th Ranger Battalion, I think, got the furthest from all the Allied forces to help relieve the battalions, but they got stuck at that little small farmstead, Isola Bella, couldn't move forward, took a lot of casualties, got stuck, lost the half track, lost the tank, people got killed. And at the end of the day, the Germans start capturing POWs, forcing them to surrender with a loudspeaker, threatening to kill them. And more Rangers surrender. Schunstrom and another Ranger officer with the last name of Sands, who becomes a dentist in California, shoot at their own Rangers to try to stop them from surrendering. Does nothing. Hundreds of Rangers are captured. A lot of them are wounded. A bunch are killed. Some escape, of course, and eventually make it all the way back to their lines, but it takes some time. The captured Rangers are paraded at the Roman Colosseum for Nazi propaganda purposes. And effectively, the 1st and the Ranger Battalion is eliminated. The 4th Battalion fights on a little bit throughout this campaign, but eventually the people and survivors of the 1st and 3rd and people who are returning from hospitals and all that, the ones who had enough time in service would ship home. The battalions would get disbanded, and the rest of them, almost all of them, joined the Devil's Brigade. And that's lucky for them because the Devil's Brigade was about to get disbanded itself for lack of having troops. So now they got a bunch of Rangers joining them. So, but that's the end of the Ranger story. Darby eventually gets command of a larger unit, but he ends up at DC, gives some great lectures, which are interesting. You can download those and read them. And he gets killed like a couple days before the Germans basically quit Italy. So that's kind of a sad thing for him to die. And then there are a great many POW escape stories. I've detailed, I think, 8 or 9 or 10 of them in the book. And there's some awesome stories, some terrible stories. You know, guys escaping from boxcars, guys escaping out of POW camps, guys making it all the way to Germany, where it's the worst of mankind, you know, the starvation, the Holocaust, Soviet prisoners being starved to death. There's one thing I mentioned, a ranger sees a bunch of starving Soviet troops basically lure a German guard dog, and they grab him and tear him to bits and eat him without cooking, you know, eat the dog without cooking. He eventually escapes, making his way through the Ukraine, Crimea, Russia, and all that stuff. And it's some really terrible stuff. But Rangers did prevail, and a number of them escaped. And that's in the book, and I'm very happy about the book. That's kind of the end of it for me, David. I'm sure you have some things.
The Houdini book, because so many of them were Houdini-like in escaping.
In their escapes, correct. So,
yeah, each chapter starts with a tale of a ranger trying to
I should give a shout out. I should give a shout out to long deceased, of course, Ranger officer who I want to say was with 1st Battalion. Anyway, he was part of the guys at Cisterna, Maltesen, and he wrote 2 great books. One is Ranger Escape and Evasion, detailing a lot of these stories. And then he wrote another one called Offlog 64 for officers, where he also details a lot of things. So I was very dependent on a lot of that, other than, of course, memoirs and some people I met and all that kind of stuff. But Maltesen's books, if you can get them, one is a Xerox copy, basically. The other one is an actual book. They are really great POW stories, really interesting stuff, great history.
So let's pause here. We're getting near the end, but we'll go on past 8:30 because we want to take any questions. So effectively, this is the end of the Darby's Rangers. As has been in the chat, there's other Ranger units. Certainly the Rangers at Normandy, which we're not going to cover.
The second
Rangers in the Pacific.
The 6th, yes. And you have the 2nd and 5th up north in France, 6th Ranger Battalion in the Pacific Theater.
Mm-hmm.
And there's other elite units, certainly the Marine Raiders, which we're not going to touch on tonight. But
what?
Well, as long as we
Yes.
could go to midnight, maybe we'll get into it.
There are also Merrill's Marauders, another provisional unit that the modern Rangers draw their lineage and history from also. We should remember them.
So let's field some questions from the audience at this point. I thought I saw a few hands up. Pat Hughes, did you want to say something? No.
I have Rick Weber unmuted.
Rick Weber?
I'll find Pat and unmute him as well.
Okay. I don't have a question. I just want to say to the Veterans Breakfast Club, this is a doubleheader. Last night was unbelievable. I don't know if I've watched a better show, but tonight I understood what was going on. It was fantastic. I'm not smart enough to be. I'm smarter than to be a Ranger. I'm airborne.
Wait a second now.
I'm not a Ranger, but
Let's talk 82nd Airborne versus Rangers, Rick. I mean,
101st. 101st. Don't hurt
Screaming
me.
Eagles.
Don't hurt me.
Yes.
Don't hurt me. I respect Rangers. We had Rangers throughout because there was no such Ranger battalion, and Rangers are great, but they don't pay any more money. Where airborne, you get more money. So, but I have to say, this was really entertaining. And this gentleman, and I will call him that, never took a breath. He gave us more information in an hour. This was a 2-hour dissertation, and I thought this was great. Last night was great, and this was unbelievable.
There's the book. There's the book.
I know, Houdini Club. I mean, all the things that he mentioned in training, there's no question. When you're young, you can train. But I was really impressed by the presentation in both nights. So kudos to most Glenn Flickinger, your other sidekick, and, I can't remember his name now. I don't think he's that good. And Sean. But these were two great shows back to back. Unbelievable. I'm glad I had the opportunity to see both of them.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.
Was it Don Patton had something else to say?
Don? Yeah, I'll ask you to unmute. Pat, did you have something to say? No? Okay.
Yeah, I did. There was one comment made about the 2nd Rangers. They actually trained at Camp Forest in Tennessee.
Tennessee, yes.
I'm a graduate of Texas A&M, and Earl Rudder signed my diploma. So
awesome. Awesome.
Yeah. Earl Rudder signed your diploma.
Yeah.
He was president of Texas A&M.
You need to put that up on eBay, Don.
I'm quite proud of that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well,
awesome.
Darby's Rangers was at D-Day. Max Snyder led the 5th Ranger Battalion ashore.
Correct.
And I will tell you this, Don Frederick said that Snyder, he thought, was the best officer that he ever met in the entire Ranger encounter. Don,
I can add to this. I'm sorry to interrupt on this, and please go back to that point in a second. Colonel Vaughn, who did the commando training at Achnacarry Castle, wrote wonderfully about Max Snyder. He really thought he was a great officer. So sadly, of course, Max kills himself eventually in Korea.
Suicide, exactly. Yeah, it was a sad story. Yeah.
But yeah, he was great. Fantastic officer, great Derby Ranger, instrumental in Normandy, really a top-notch guy.
I'll add one other thing. The Minnesota Historical Society, back in the 1990s, maybe into the 2000s, did a lot of oral histories. So you have got a lot of the Derby Rangers that were interviewed in their oral histories or wartime histories are in the archives of the Minnesota Historical Society. If anybody is going to do other work on that, Don Frederick was actually captured. He was part of OFLOG 64. He was a bunkmate to Colonel Waters, if you remember, who got shot during the bomb raid. We actually did 2 programs with A-Bomb here in Minnesota with Don Frederick talking about their experiences as Rangers and as the the Hammelberg raid.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Don. Unless there's any other questions, Sean, you see anybody with a hand raised? Or I'd like to close, if unless there's other questions, with a couple of the last photos that Mir provided,
Oh, yeah.
because they're just so poignant. And
Oh, yeah.
Good to
Those
go.
are awesome. Yeah. Thank you. I forgot about those.
I just was looking at them myself on my other screen, and I said, "Yeah, we got to show these because they're just fascinating." Let me get to them. Here we are.
Original guys, 1942. I think that's probably Lieutenant Knudsen up front with his swagger stick and gloves. This is in Scotland, Achnacarry Castle. You can see what they looked like at the beginning of the war during training. The
And
next
almost-
slide. Yeah.
Almost imagine that as a World War I doughboys, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. They totally look it. 1992, that's a picture Phil Stern took. And that's some of the Derby's Rangers who, of course, 50 years later went back to Carrickfergus. This is also in Scotland. So next, please. Great photograph. I think that's Bing Evans, very famous Derby Ranger on the right, lighting up the smoke for the commando. Bing became a commissioned officer, and he's really a hardcore Derby Ranger. Then Phil Stern took this picture in 92 also, reenacting it. I believe that's Bing Evans. I don't know the other guys, unfortunately. I never spent the time to identify him. And on my last trip to Scotland, I took this picture, but it shows you the Commando Memorial beautifully. And that's near Achnacarry Castle. And it's got an amazing vantage point. It gets really cold and windy there if you're at the wrong time of month there. I think, is there one more? Yes, there's one more there. That's another, those are the battle flags of the World War II. That's a battle flag of World War II Ranger Battalion Associations laying the wreath with the Piper. Awesome picture. I think Phil Stern might have taken this, but don't quote me on that. But I got it from his collection, but somebody else might have taken this. And last but not least, the town of Carrickfergus put in this big black rock with a Black Ranger plaque honoring Derby's Rangers and of course us, the modern guys. And this is at the Sunnylands Army Camp where the Derby's Rangers trained at Carrickfergus. It's literally a stone's throw away from an old 10th century or 9th century castle where they actually interviewed a bunch of volunteers back in 1942. And those guys are from, I forget which company, but they're from the 1st Ranger Battalion. They sent 10 guys over for this event. And you have got the mayor and you've got some other attendees there as well. It was a great event. And they try to host these every few years. I'm going in August to Carrickfergus to the museum for a book signing and to meet with some people. So I'm looking forward to that. So thank you for those pictures. I forgot about them.
Oh, thank you for providing them. They're really fascinating pictures. And we want to thank you, Mir, very much for tonight's program. Your knowledge is just incredible. David Hogan, thank you for being on board with us and providing.
Sorry, I hogged all the time, David.
Well, you had the presentation. You've been working on it more recently, but I would also add too that you made a real contribution with all the additional sources.
Thank you.
Brought to the story, and these pictures are fascinating. I'm really fascinated by the disciplinary issue.
There's a lot in the book.
I wonder how West Pointer like Derby would have let all these guys, get away with as much as they did.
Rangers.
When you look at Eisenhower and Patton at this time in North Africa, they are just constantly talking about we got to have discipline over. In fact, a friend of mine who was an aide in Patton's headquarters, Batman, said the chief of staff came in one day storming, where's General Patton? And Patton was out front with a bunch of Rangers who had just come back from patrol, all scruffy, and he was putting them through the manual of arms to put some discipline into them. So you've got this enlisted officer. What would the officer of the time think about Derby's Rangers? Some of the.
Yeah. Well, we know what Patton thought. Best damn combat soldiers of North Africa, but the discipline, Yeah, that's
The
a whole different
discipline
ballgame.
view is, well, you know how the Army is, you know, it's
Yeah.
an act of faith. The discipline is sacred.
Well, as I've read somewhere else, it's hard to train men to be killers and then just expect them to turn it on and off,
Yes.
Spot on.
point in
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Listen, we need to close up shop. Sean, thank you so very much for all you do for us. Mir and Dave, thanks again to our audience. Thank you for tuning in. This kind of really whets my appetite to think about the other Ranger battalions and also the Pacific, the six Rangers and the others. So we may be coming back to visit those subjects in the near future.
Awesome. Thank you.
Good night, all. Thank you so very much.
Rangers lead the way.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you Monday night. Have a great weekend.